Imagine a sound so terrifying it freezes you solid. A sound that cuts through the noise of battle and tells you, in a split second, that your life is over. On a battlefield, you learn the language of survival. The whistle of an incoming shell gives you a moment to dive for cover. The sharp crack of a rifle is a single, deadly message. These are known terrors, but then a new sound rips through the air. It's not a boom or a crack. It's a continuous, high-pitched mechanical scream. A sound so unnatural it feels like the world itself is being torn apart. This isn't the sound of a soldier firing a gun. This is the sound of a machine that knows only how to destroy. This is the voice of Hitler's Buzzsaw, the MG42. For nearly a century, that shriek has meant death. But here's the chilling mystery. How did a weapon forged in desperation become so ruthlessly perfect? How did a design from 1942 achieve a terrible immortality, its ghost still haunting us today? The answer is a dark saga of genius and a design so lethal it simply refused to die. The story of the MG42 doesn't start with its own creation. It begins with its predecessor, a weapon of such breathtaking genius that its failure became the catalyst for a legend. This was the MG34, the world's first true general-purpose machine gun. It was an engineering marvel that could be carried by infantry, mounted on tanks, or aimed at the sky. It was an instrument of war built with the soul of a Swiss watch, each component milled with painstaking precision from solid blocks of high-quality steel. It was the pride of the Third Reich's industrial might, a symbol of their supposed superiority. But this beautiful masterpiece harbored a fatal secret, a flaw so deep it threatened to bring the entire German war machine to a grinding halt. The MG34 was a peacetime weapon forced into a total war. Its perfection was its curse. Each one demanded a staggering 150 hours of highly skilled labor to create. On the vast, frozen hellscape of the Eastern Front, where weapons were lost by the thousands every week, this meticulous craftsmanship was a crippling liability. Germany wasn't fighting a parade ground war, it was drowning in a brutal, sprawling war of attrition. They didn't need a few hundred works of art, they needed a flood of reliable killing machines. The MG34, for all its genius, was a beautiful anchor dragging their production schedules into the abyss. A desperate, almost sacrilegious order came down from high command. Forget perfection. We need a new weapon, and it must be better. Faced with this production crisis, German engineers were given a command that bordered on insanity, an order that was a direct betrayal of their entire engineering philosophy. They were told to abandon the sacred tradition of precision craftsmanship and embrace something they despised: crude, brutal efficiency. It was an act of industrial heresy. The new philosophy was simple and savage. Forget the artistry of the master craftsman and adopt the cold logic of the assembly line. Instead of carving a weapon from solid blocks of flawless steel, they would now build it from common sheets of metal, beaten into shape by industrial presses and fused together with crude welds. This new weapon, the Maschinengewehr 42, was not born in a quiet workshop. It was forged in the fire and noise of mass production. To the old guard, it must have looked like a monstrous caricature, an ugly, soulless imitation of its elegant predecessor. But then came the moment of truth, the test firing that would shatter all expectations. The results were not just impressive, they were world-altering. Production time was slashed from 150 hours down to a mere 75. The cost plummeted by nearly a quarter. But the true shock, the number that defied all logic, was its performance. They hadn't just created a cheaper gun, they had unleashed a monster. The rate of fire exploded from the MG34's respectable 900 rounds per minute to a mind-bending 1/200 when the MG42 was finally unleashed on the battlefields of North Africa and the Eastern Front in 1942. It didn't just kill, it announced itself with a voice of pure mechanical hatred. Allied soldiers were utterly unprepared for what they heard. It wasn't the familiar crack thump of gunfire they knew. It was a single, unbroken, high-frequency scream that seemed to tear through the air. Veterans would later describe it as the sound of ripping linen, a sound that attacked the mind long before the bullets ever touched the body. It created a dome of pure terror over the battlefield, a noise so relentless and alien that it paralyzed entire platoons. Soldiers reported freezing in place, unable to think or act, convinced that no human could survive such an onslaught. It didn't take long for the weapon to earn a name that perfectly captured its horrific essence. Hitler is Buzzsaw. The psychological warfare was so effective, so utterly demoralizing, that the U.S. military took an unprecedented step. They created official training films not to teach soldiers how to tactically counter the gun. That was almost impossible. But to mentally condition them to inoculate their minds against the sheer soul-crushing terror of its sound, just so they wouldn't break before the battle had even truly begun. The gun's terrifying reputation wasn't just about its raw, chaotic power. It had a silent partner, a cold and calculating brain that transformed its brute force into something far more sinister. This was the Lafette 42 tripod, a piece of engineering so ingenious it remains the true secret behind the Buzzsaw's legend. To call it a tripod is a profound insult. It was a complete weapon system. Its heavy legs housed a sophisticated recoil buffering system, a set of powerful springs that absorbed the gun's violent shuddering, turning a bucking beast into a stable, precise instrument of death. It even had its own separate trigger, allowing the gunner to fire without directly touching the vibrating weapon. But hidden deep within its central body was its darkest secret, a feature of such diabolical genius it feels like science fiction. It was a clockwork mechanism known as the Tiefenfeuer automat, a mechanical computer for delivering death. A gunner could preset a designated kill box in the field, defining the left and right limits and the near and far range. Once set, he could retreat to the safety of a bunker, pull a simple string tied to the trigger, and the machine would do the rest. The gun would erupt, automatically beginning a macabre dance, sweeping back and forth across the designated zone with cold, mathematical precision. It turned a single soldier into an automated fortress, capable of laying down an inescapable wall of lead on a target he couldn't even see. This was the true horror of the MG42, not just its sound, but the intelligent robotic death that the Lafette mount enabled. This godlike power, however, was a pact with the devil, and it came at a terrible price. The MG42 was a logistical black hole, an insatiable beast whose blistering rate of fire threatened to consume Germany's entire ammunition supply. A standard 250-round belt, a heavy steel box weighing nearly 20 pounds, could be turned into a stream of hot brass and vaporized in just 10 agonizing seconds of continuous fire. This horrifying consumption forced the Germans to completely re-engineer their infantry squad. It was no longer a team of riflemen. It became a cult of servants dedicated to a single mechanical god. The gunner and his assistant were its high priests, but the rest of the squad became little more than human pack mules, their own rifles almost an afterthought as they hauled the immense quantities of ammunition required to keep the beast fed. But the most immediate and terrifying danger was reserved for the gunner himself. He didn't just operate the gun, he tamed it, walking a razor's edge between unleashing hell and being consumed by it. A moment of panic, holding the trigger down for even a few seconds too long, would cause the barrel to glow a menacing cherry red and warp into useless scrap. An even greater fear was a catastrophic failure in the feeding system, a jam that could turn his greatest weapon into a plume of shrapnel in his face. It was a weapon that demanded as much discipline as it did fury, a double-edged sword that required its wielder to be the calmest, most controlled man on a field of pure chaos. On the battlefields of World War II, one sound was more terrifying than any other. It wasn't the scream of a dive bomber or the rumble of a tank. It was the sound of a machine gun that fired so fast its individual shots blended into a single, terrifying ripping noise like a giant canvas being torn in two. This was the MG42, Hitler's Buzzsaw, and it was so brutally effective that the Allies became obsessed. Fear turned to a desperate, grudging respect, leading to a simple, pragmatic conclusion. If you can't beat it, copy it. Confident in its unmatched industrial power, the U.S. Army launched a top-secret project, T-24. The mission seemed straightforward. Clone the German masterpiece. After all, this was the nation building thousands of bombers and ships. How hard could it be to copy a machine gun? They reverse-engineered the parts and planned to rechamber it for their own powerful .30-06 cartridge. But what the American engineers failed to grasp was that the MG42 wasn't just a machine. It was a violent, perfectly balanced ecosystem. The genius of its roller-locking mechanism was in its brutal harmony with the German 8mm Mauser round. The longer, more powerful American cartridge, a round they thought superior, threw this entire symphony of violence into chaos. The prototype was an absolute disaster. It was a clumsy, unreliable mess that jammed constantly, failed to extract casings, and couldn't get anywhere close to the fire rate of the original. The project was quietly and humiliatingly abandoned. It was a silent admission that some forms of genius simply cannot be copied. This failure was the ultimate unintentional compliment to the German designers. The MG42 wasn't just a collection of parts. It was a work of dark, mechanical art that the most powerful nation on Earth could not replicate. As the fires of World War II were extinguished, the world began the massive task of disarmament. Tanks were melted down, rifles were put into storage, and entire arsenals became footnotes in history. This is the fate of all weapons when their war is over. But the MG42 was an anomaly. Its design, now separated from the twisted ideology that created it, was recognized as pure, brutal function, a prize to be seized by any army that valued firepower above all else. Captured stockpiles were eagerly pressed into service by nations and guerrilla movements across the globe. Yugoslavia even created a near-perfect clone called the M53, a testament to the design's raw appeal. But the weapon's true resurrection was yet to come, born from the most incredible irony imaginable. In the 1950s, a new West Germany, now a crucial NATO ally, needed to rearm. With legendary engineering pride, they looked at the modern machine guns offered by their new American and British partners. They were profoundly unimpressed. In a stunning act of pragmatism, they concluded that nothing the victors had created could match the weapon they themselves had built out of desperation a decade earlier. So, they went back to their own past. They took the original MG42, modified it to accept modern belts, and rechambered it for the new standard 7.62mm NATO round. They gave it a new, sterile name, the MG3. But this was no new gun. It was a ghost in a new uniform. The heart of the beast, the lightning-fast roller-locking action, the quick change barrel, and most importantly, that terrifying, ripping sound, remained identical. It was the ultimate proof that true genius, no matter how dark its origin, is eternal. Today, its direct descendant, the MG3, serves as a chilling testament to this legacy. Mounted on advanced tanks like the Leopard 2 and carried by the infantry of dozens of modern armies, its iconic silhouette is a dreaded sight in conflict zones across the globe. And though the name has changed, the sound has not. That same terrifying shriek that broke the minds of soldiers on the beaches of Normandy can still be heard today. An auditory ghost from 1942 that simply refuses to be silent. The story of the MG42 is a profound and unsettling paradox. It was a weapon born from industrial desperation, a brute forged from stamped steel in a nation's darkest hour, yet it accidentally achieved a level of mechanical perfection that has remained the undisputed benchmark for firepower for over 80 years. It's a terrifying lesson in engineering, the ultimate testament to a dark truth, that in the crucible of total war, the most brutal solutions often create the most perfect and the most immortal of monsters. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into military history. See you next time.